Hey, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started right at the top of the hour because we have a lot of material and information to cover and make sure that we're answering all of you all's question before we wrap up for tonight as well. As you all know, thank you for attending, and you are here because you are very curious about testing, very curious about how testing plays into the college admissions and the college preparation process, and really just wondering, is my student score good enough or will it be good enough? So we are here to tell you all about those very interesting topics and kind of walk you through a little bit of information that you probably haven't heard before. So first, our agenda. We're going to give you an overview of the history of testing in college admissions, tell you a little bit about more recent updates from the ACT and the SAT, give you an overview of some of the more recent trends in testing at different type of universities and colleges, tell you what testing actually means when it comes to playing a role in the overall admissions process, talk about the life cycle of testing so you can know when you should start preparing, when you should aim to be done with your testing, whether it's ACT or SAT. And then last but not least, talk about how Galin can actually help you out because this can sometimes get stressful. So, like I said, a lot of info, but I promise it'll go by fast. We'll try our best. So first, again, I'm really excited to talk with you all today. My name is Justin Clarke. I'm the Associate Director of College Counseling at Galin. I'm originally from the Midwest, small city named Joliet, Illinois, which you probably don't know unless you're a Blues Brothers fan. I am a recent transplant to New Orleans, so my weather these days is a lot warmer than what I grew up in outside of Chicago. And I am a very proud graduate of Northwestern University. Go Cats. And right after I graduated Northwestern, they actually convinced me to come back to campus, and I started my career in admissions. I'm a former assistant director of admissions at Northwestern. I have over 12 plus years from Northwestern at the undergraduate level to also be a director at the graduate level at other universities, a high school college counselor, and also an independent consultant. So I have reviewed thousands upon thousands of applications. I've recruited a lot of amazing students throughout my career. And thankfully, I've been able to see all the different ways that students really traverse the landscape of academics at the undergraduate and graduate level from an admissions perspective to also being a high school counselor. So I'm a big nerd when it comes to education. And then I'll give the floor to my colleague, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm seeing some familiar names in the participant list, so it's good to see some of you again virtually. I'm also a proud graduate of Northwestern, so you got the Purple Mafia here working with you. But I did my undergraduate degree there. I'm originally from the Pittsburgh area. I moved to Madison for grad school, and I stuck around. I've been living here for 13 years now. I have a wife and two kids. Got my master's at UW, as I mentioned. And when I was in grad school, I started tutoring, doing test prep here, ACT, SAT, PSAT, and just kind of stayed with it. And eventually joined the team full time as our test prep director. Over that time, just as Justin has, I've worked with hundreds of students. I should count the number of sessions I've done. It's easily in the thousands. And a lot of what I do now is training and supporting our test prep tutors and keeping them up to date with the information that I'm about to share with you all. So I'm going to talk for a little bit as trying not to get too into the weeds, but a lot of what I'm going to discuss on the test prep side, on the ACT, SAT, PSAT side, you kind of need the background of the tests to understand where the scores are coming from and then how that all intersects on the admission side. So the history of testing in college admissions, the SAT has been around for almost 100 years. It started in 1926, originally designed in probably very problematic ways, let's say at the time, to measure what people thought of as intelligence. Traditionally more popular on the East and West coasts. The ACT started in the late 50s, 1959, more directly designed to measure high school level competencies, things that students were actually learning in school. Traditionally has been more popular in the Midwest and in the South. And so that's sort of how the two tests began. They both have evolved a lot since then, and have converged and diverged in interesting ways. But I will say that the content across the two tests now, this is not a scientific number. We usually say about three-quarters of the content's about the same. So whatever the SAT was measuring before, whatever the ACT was measuring before, there's been a lot of convergence since then in how they conceive of themselves as standardized tests that measure whether kids are ready to go to college. So here's what they look like now. A lot of these numbers should look familiar to you. The ACT is out of 36. You take the section scores and average them up. The SAT is out of 1600. There was a little bit of a period there where it was out of 2400, but for a lot of its history, recent history anyway, it's been out of 1600. And that's an 800 on a reading writing section and 800 on a math section. The ACT has four sections, English, math, reading, and science. The science is going forward going to be optional. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute because that's a big change. The SAT, reading English and math. And the biggest difference between the two right now is the delivery, the mode of testing. So the ACT is still sort of your traditional what we call linear exam. You go in order, one through whatever number on each section, bubble in the answers. Based on the number of questions you get right, you get a certain score. The SAT is not like that anymore. The SAT is adaptive by section. So if you've ever taken a grad school exam like the GRE, GMAT, if you've had kids that have taken, exams like MAP or STAR in elementary school, you're probably familiar with what adaptive means. The sort of classic adaptive test is you get a question right, the next question's harder. You get a question wrong, the next question's easier. What the SAT does is they do it by section. So when I mentioned above the reading and the English and the math, students will do a reading English section depending on how they did on those questions, and each question's worth a slightly different amount. They either get kicked up into a harder second module of that same section, or they get kicked down into an easier one. And then they do the same thing with math, where the first math section is easy, medium, hard. The next math section that they get, depending on how they did on the first one, is either more easy questions or more hard questions. And in order to get that maximum score of 800 on each section, you need to get into the harder module. This is also not something that can be accomplished with a paper pencil test, so the SAT is fully digital. The ACT does have a digital option that's the same as their written option, but it is not adaptive. And I think the question that I get more often than anything else when I'm doing consultations with families is, well, do colleges have a certain preference for one or the other? And they used to, but they don't anymore. Both tests are accepted at all schools. So that's the sort of the current situation, the comparison across of the ACT and SAT as about as briefly as I can describe them. But we do have to talk a little bit more about what's happening with the ACT. So for the first time since I've been tutoring, I think it's been about 25 years, the ACT is changing a little bit this fall. So this is going to be relevant, I'm guessing, to all of you as parents of students that'll be testing this next school year, class of 2027 and beyond. The biggest change is that the science section, like I said, is now technically optional. It is not going to be included anymore in the composite score. It's not going to be included when the ACT does super scoring, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. It still gets its own section score out of 36, just like English, math, and reading. It'll still be reported. It just won't be included in the composite score. So, an early, I'll talk a little bit later too about how we think about test prep and approach it. But on our end, one thing we're doing is we are still preparing students for the science section as we have before. We still think college is going to care about it. Justin can talk more about this when he gets into the admissions conversation, but that's how we're looking at it on the test prep side. Colleges can do whatever they want. They don't have to follow what the ACT is doing. The ACT didn't even super score tests until a couple of years ago. And so just because the ACT says this is what we're doing with the science section doesn't mean that colleges have to do it. Are they going to, look at scores across the legacy version of the ACT and the new enhanced version? Maybe. Are they going to consider the science? Probably. So there's lots of nuances there that a college counselor can help you kind of sort through. So that's, again, in brief, the ACT. There's a couple of other changes happening, but that's the big one. Um, Also, a little conversation about PSAT. So the PSAT is given to juniors. Some schools give it to sophomores also in the fall. There's a window mostly in October that it drips into November a little bit. But that's usually when students take the PSAT. Identical to the SAT in terms of structure. Digital, adaptive, same number of questions per section. It used to be slightly shorter than the SAT, and they've kind of dropped that now. It's just the same test with maybe slightly easier questions. The big thing you need to know for the PSAT, and again, something that Justin's going to talk about later in the presentation, is that its purpose, its primary purpose, is for national merit. We use it a little bit when we're looking at like we're trying to figure out what's best for students in terms of test prep, but really what it's used for is national merit qualification. It's also a slightly different scoring system. Instead of being out of 1600, it's out of 1520. So 760 max on with maximum score on both the verbal and math sections. But even that is not really the important number that you need to know. The important number is what the National Merit Corporation calls the selection index. And this is a different calculation that there's no test. You don't have to memorize this. Just just know what the threshold numbers are is going to be the important thing. What you do is you chop off the zeros from the end of each score, and you multiply the verbal score by two because technically that's reading and writing together. And then you add those two scores together. So an example of what this would look like is if you have a student that scores a 660 on the verbal and a 700 on the math, chop off the zeros, so 66 and 70, double the verbal score, 132, add them together, 132 plus 70 is 202. Again, you don't have to think too hard about that, but you will see that selection index score on PSAT score reports. And then how national merit qualification works based on that score. Justin, if you can move ahead to the next slide. There's different thresholds. So commended students is the lowest score threshold. This is about 50,000 students a year. This has ticked up a little bit in recent years. When I was putting this presentation together, I still had the old number of 207, which wasn't that old. It was only a couple years ago. But they literally just came out and said that the selection index threshold for the coming class of 2026, so the graduating seniors coming this year, is going to be around 210. That is just something nice for the resume. It's not, you don't get any scholarships for that, but you can say that you're a commended student. The threshold that we're always trying to get students to when we do PSAT prep with them is the semifinalist level. This is determined at the state level, and it's approximately the top 1% of scorers across the country. It doesn't, it's a little fuzzy on that, but that's how you can that's how I always think about it and explain it. For Wisconsin, the selection index that you want your student to hit is sort of in the 214, 215 range right now. We don't have the final number on that yet for the current graduating seniors, but it's going to probably be around there. That's lower than a place like New York or California, higher than a place like Wyoming, sort of in the middle. But that's the threshold we're usually trying to hit. And if students get to the semifinalist level, they're almost always going to get to the finalist level. There's not a ton of work to do after that point. There's an application. They need to validate their score with the subsequent test, which can be either an SAT or an ACT. And all the students we're doing test prep with are preparing for the SAT or ACT. So they'll be taking that test. And this is what leads to scholarship eligibility. And again, I know Justin has more to say on that going forward. So that's how the ACT, the SAT, and the PSAT all factor in. Thought I would show the dates when the tests are being given this year. The SAT has every month in the fall, which is new. They didn't used to have a September test. And sort of the way it worked out is the ACT has almost every month in the spring. The star on the March ACT date that's for public schools in Wisconsin. If you have a student that goes to a private school, they won't give that test in March. Those lots of schools, private schools will, and even some public schools will also give an in-school ACT at other times of the year, like in October, for example. And finally, since I mentioned it a couple times, I thought it'd be helpful to discuss superscoring. So what superscoring is when you take multiple exams and you get different section scores in each of those exams, you can take the best section score from each exam and combine them and to make a better composite score. So here's just a hypothetical example of what that might look like for the ACT right now. Again, science no longer on the composite score, but English, math, reading. In December, let's say you have a student that gets that combination, 24, 26, 29, add them up, divide by 3. The composite score would be 26. And then they take the test again in February, they get a 27. Well, if you look at it, the English score was higher in February. The math and reading scores were higher in December. If you take each of those higher section scores, now they have a composite of 28. So that's higher than what they had on one administration alone. Not all colleges will superscore, very notably, UW-Madison does not. but that's how super scoring works, and that's an advantage of taking multiple tests, which is always what we advocate for our students to do. And now I'll pass it back over to Justin.
Great. Thanks, Dan. So, with all of that background and with kind of that primer as far as how testing has evolved, how it started, and also some different aspects of testing that you should be aware of as you're moving forward and different tests that are available, I wanted to take us to more recent history of some notable universities from as recent as 10 years ago to where they're currently sitting at now. Because one thing that has become a very big topic, at least over the past 5 years following the pandemic, is universities being test optional, but it also seeming like universities' averages have just absolutely skyrocketed. And while we have seen uh, pretty much across the board a fair amount of universities' averages going up, I did want to draw attention to some more salient 10-year trends at universities that are usually pretty popular with our students. So, say, for example, we have University of Illinois, large public flagship university as well, strong across the board, particularly as an emphasis for students interested in computer science or in engineering. As you can see, even just looking at the ACT, their 2015 average, solid, strong, 26 to a 31. Over 10 years, that's jumped up just at a base level of 4 points if you're looking at the ACT, and going from a 1270 to a 1400 if you're looking at the SAT. Now, yes, some aspects of that is with a bit of inflation because of test optionality, but it's a pretty consistent jump that we've seen throughout that time, especially if you're looking at other comparable universities. And the reason why I've given you all this fair range is to kind of put a lot of things in perspective. Because if you're looking, say, for example, at Harvard, the Ivy of the Ivies, they're pretty close to where they usually are. In 2015, they were 32 to a 35. In 2025, the average slash the middle 50 of the students that they're admitting, 34 to a 36. Either way, that's pretty competitive. So it's only a jump if you're looking at the baseline of roughly about 2 points. But that's to say that when you're looking at a larger jump at a University of Illinois versus hyper competitive universities, or as we like to describe them as highly selective universities, of which Harvard would be a part of, things are getting more competitive, both from an aspect of average test scores by state and also nationally. We're seeing raised for a fair amount of students, and we're still seeing a high percentage of students that are sending test scores, usually strong test scores, whenever they possibly can at universities that they're very, very attracted to. You see a similar jump from a U of I to a University of Maryland on the East Coast. 2015, average 29 to a 33. 2025, more currently, a 32 to a 35. And again, this is really highlight across small liberal arts universities like a Haverford, you can see on the screen, to private but still Big Ten like a Northwestern, go Cats, to also, our hometown heroes, University of Wisconsin-Madison, that things are traditionally getting more competitive, and we're not anticipating that trend to go anywhere. Though, for the sake of our students, we're hoping it starts to ease off a little bit. But this really harkens to, and we'll talk about this with a bit more depth later, why it's important to know the testing landscape from a general state, whether it's the PSAT, you're hoping to be a national merit semifinalist, whether it's your ACT, whether it's your SAT, and being able to get some support and also have some planning sooner rather than later so that you can identify these type of universities that your student may be really interested in and do that necessary legwork to get within either range or hopefully be right in target when it comes to some of these testing averages at these universities of your dreams. And when you're thinking about testing and why we even care so much. And I'm going to keep on my consultant hat, but I'm going to bring on my former director of admissions at Northwestern hat here. There's a lot that goes into the role of testing and why these colleges and universities actually care so much and put so much importance on these. First and foremost, it's for better or for worse, and Dan talked a little bit about its murky origins. This is what we have and what we can use as a standard method of review. And that's across the board. I cannot tell you, when I was director, I traveled to so many different high schools up and down the East Coast. And I had traditional high schools where they were strictly college prep, and the highest level of academic courses you could take were honors. I had IB level schools. I had high schools that were so impressive that almost their entire offering was APs that you may have not even heard of. And I also had smaller schools where they didn't have grades and they used stars. So, as you can imagine, with so much variety of the type of high school that our students are coming from, the last thing that any of these colleges or universities want to do to their students during the admissions process is shortchange where they're coming from and the type of academic environment that they are really traversing and putting their best foot forward within. So, whether it's the ACT, whether it's the SAT, whether it's AP tests, whether it's the PSAT for use towards individualized national merit consideration, they're not perfect, but they are currently what we have, and they give students an amazing shot at being able to level the playing field to a certain degree and give colleges and universities confidence that whatever their testing may be, if it's within shooting range, if it's within the target range of their middle 50 of students they're usually admitting, it gives us a little bit of confidence that, hey, this student has the chops to not spend all 4 years in the library, but actually be challenged at a reasonable level and rise to that challenge within the classroom on each college's respective campus. We mentioned scholarship consideration, which with the rising prices of colleges these days, all of us can use a little bit of scholarship consideration. A lot of universities, both private and public, will take a look at testing for a number of different ways to offer some type of financial support to the students that they're going to be offering and admit to. And these exist in a couple different ways. First, you have your merit scholarships. As the name implies, this is reward for the type of work that a student has done, and the largest percentage of these merit scholarships are based on your academics. Now, while a fair amount of these do not require you to be submitting testing, whether it's ACT, SAT, or any APs. A large portion of them really will become more attractive and more reasonable for you to attain if you have stellar academics that show up on paper via your transcripts and you've done the hard work of being able to study for and succeed in your standardized test of your choice. And again, those are great to be able to drive down the year by year overall price tag that's attached to a university that you may get an admit from. Additionally, for colleges that maybe have a flagship academic major or a flagship program, for example, that is a bit more competitive than just getting admitted to the university in general, there's also going to be specific scholarships that have either a threshold or a target when it comes to testing. And that goes into which students are going to be admitted into these programs. So it's one of those things where I like to say testing is great to have and not need, but it's horrible to need and not have, especially when you're thinking about the scholarship considerations where they still do play a really, really large part in students being considered for and eventually accepted into. Now, the last one is a bit more niche, and I'll admit, but testing also plays a very large role and has a lot of impact within direct admission programs. And I've listed a couple of the ones that are usually going to be the most popular. Whether it's a business, and Indiana Kelley School of Business is a great example of this. They are right up there with MIT in terms of some of my favorite universities because of how straightforward and honest they are, what it takes to get accepted. If you go to their website, they will tell you the GPA that you need. They will tell you the testing threshold that you need in order to gain automatic admittance, which in the world of stressful college admissions, that is news and amazing things to hear to any student's ears because you just know exactly what you're aiming for. There's engineering programs that are very competitive that, again, are direct admit that need a certain caliber of testing in order to solidify that a student is going to be successful within the rigor of their classes and their overall program. And similar, whether it's very competitive computer science direct admit programs or even more advanced 4+1 programs, whether that's pre-med or MBA focused. So, and again, these are just the handful of direct admit programs that highly consider testing. There, of course, are going to be others, but usually we find these are some of the largest number that we see at different universities and the ones that are a bit more straightforward and clear with how testing plays an impactful role into their direct admission policies that we see. So again, all of this information, I want everyone to remember testing is amazing to have and not need. You don't want to be in a position to need testing and not have it. So definitely keep a lookout for whether it's merit scholarships or direct admission programs for the impact they can have on your students' admissibility to a university. And then I'll pass it back to Dan to talk a little bit more about the life cycle of test prep.
Yeah, so again, sort of how sorry about that. So sort of how we conceive of or how we think about doing test prep. Some of you have already done test prep with us, so this will be a little bit redundant. But for others, a great first step is to meet with me. I do consultations with families all the time about sort of why are what we can do for you in terms of test prep, how that relates to college counseling, and what that would look like for your students. A big part of deciding on what how much test prep to do, the extent of the number of sessions we recommend, and things like that, are to take a diagnostic exam or two. In previous years, a lot of our diagnostics have been ACT because if you're a public school student in the state of Wisconsin, you're taking the ACT anyway. With the changes to the test and a little bit of uncertainty there, we've been doing a little bit more SAT diagnostics as well. And then there's ways to compare those two and make some nuanced decisions about which test would be best for your kid. Once you've picked a test, we usually say pick one. You can do both, but it generally works better if you pick a test and stick with it. And if it's not going great, then we can always switch to the other one. But we usually recommend switching to or selecting ACT or SAT, but not both when you're doing your test prep. High scorers, students that are scoring sort of toward a 30 on the ACT, toward a 1350-ish on the SAT, should also consider PSAT again for the national merit possibilities. You know, the National Merit Scholarship itself is fine. It's not a ton of money, but they're getting qualifying for national merit really does open a lot of doors. Companies and universities start to get your information and reach out. Um, we always have a target test date that we suggest for your child once you sign up. That said, you know, leading up to that test date, we'll recommend a certain number of sessions, depending on your diagnostic scores. But even so, we almost always recommend doing additional sessions because students aren't just going to take these tests once unless they get a really, really high score or the score they absolutely know that they need for the schools they want to get into. There's a couple of big benefits for taking the test multiple times. One is just getting more comfortable with the feeling of it. You know, you'll see on the slide here, I say like part of these packages that we do with students is not just meeting with tutors, it's taking regular practice exams. And that's always where I feel like we get the most bang for our buck as tutors, figuring out what students need and where their strengths and weaknesses are. But going in and taking an official test is a different animal. It's just a different feeling than coming into our office and doing a proctor test, even though we simulate it as best we can. So getting that first test, you know, under a student's belt, they get comfortable with it. They start really knowing what it feels like, what the adrenaline feels like, the seriousness of it. And then on subsequent tests, they're more used to it. And then they can get their super scores up if they take multiple tests as well. So that's usually how we think about it. Take a practice test, sign up for a test prep package, work through that package to the test date with a bunch of practice tests, and then likely continue on for a couple more dates to increase that super score. More on how we can help. One thing, if you've done a consultation with me or if you've worked with us, you'll hear me say this a lot. It's sort of the first thing that I always say, which is on the test prep side, we are one-to-one and we are personalized. So you get a tutor that your child will work with for the duration of their test prep. It's not just whoever's here. It's not a class, that we do those from time to time. It is just one-on-one. Your student will meet with that tutor throughout the duration. And it's personalized. We have a curriculum, but I always use that word loosely. We encourage our tutors to bring in other materials, go out of order, work on things that students really are struggling with so that we can improve their score. Don't just do what's next. There's no such thing as what's next. We really do want to personalize it for all of you. Again, the lesson packages are going to be based on your child's diagnostic score. Another really important thing that I always emphasize is meeting consistently. We will sort of space out. We've just see it in our data. I don't have a great answer for why this is the case. I think it has something to do with just the standardized nature of the test versus a test that a student can take in school and cram for, frankly. But meeting consistently week after week leading up to a test date is also something that's really important. We work on gaps in content and on strategies and on timing, although timing tends to come along as we work on content and strategies. And again, the regular practice tests are just super, super important for us to see how our students are progressing.
Definitely. And then on the college counseling side, in addition to multiple programs, this one-on-one, this personalization is something that you're going to find in all the arms of Galen's level of support. So similarly, we take and we meet every single family that we work with as college counselors and every single student that we're helping advise, guide, and support as college counselors. We meet you exactly where you're at, both in terms of the varying ages that you can possibly start with us, whether you're ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. We know that everyone starts to think about and prepare for college at different times for different reasons, and everyone is going to have a different pathway towards the colleges of their dreams and also how they want to build upon or even finish out their high school career to make sure that they're not only preparing themselves for great college access but also college success once they actually step foot on their chosen campus. And towards that ethos of meeting our families, meeting our students and our clients where you're at, we offer a lot of different ways that we can be of support, regardless, again, of what year in high school you're coming to us, whether it's our comprehensive counseling, where everything is included. We like to say it's kind of a all you can possibly want and all you could possibly ask for college counseling. Or if you want something that's a bit more under your control, whereas, hey, we feel really good about putting together the list, but we need help writing, both in terms of brainstorming the personal statement or even some of these very interesting, I'll describe them, supplemental essays or college specific essays. You can go the hourly counseling route where we meet you exactly how often you would like to meet with us. It's still going to be one-on-one support from a college counselor, for example, but we can have it a bit more targeted as opposed to the wide spaced and also a little bit more inclusive, comprehensive. Additionally, if you feel like you kind of have most things in hand, whether it's putting the college list together, whether it's some really cool summer programs that your student is going to be applying to, or also figuring out what their classes are going to look like, heading into their next year. Maybe you just need essay review. And we do also offer that as an ad hoc feature, in addition to more personalized individual application review as well. So, with all these different programs, with all these different ways that we can be of service to you, we can be of support to you, and really try and bring down the stress that often comes with preparing for college. It's an amazing one-two punch between not only the college counseling offerings that we do have, but also the very similarly personalized one-on-one test prep that is offered. So again, we can meet you where you're at in terms of where you're reaching out from and also when you're reaching out to us, but let us help you. It makes this process so much easier and less stressful, I will say. In terms of next step, Dan, do you want to jump in for test
Yeah,
prep?
sure. I can do the test prep part. So I mentioned meet with me is usually a good first step. You can set up a diagnostic test either before or after that meeting. Either way is fine. If you know you want to get set up and you don't even want to do a consultation, we can do that too. We can just see a diagnostic score and make a recommendation on number of sessions and target test date and things like that. One thing that we always emphasize, so Justin mentioned, people come at us at different times for different reasons for college counseling. On the test prep side, the timeline's a little bit more constrained. This is a great time to start for rising juniors because it gives you lots of options for test dates next school year. The later you start into the fall, the fewer test date options you have, and then there's a sport thing or there's some sort of other conflict, and now you don't have the test date that you wanted. And so getting started early, that's something we always emphasize because students, I mean, students can test into their senior year, but usually they don't want to. And so if we can get them done by, spring of junior year, that's always our goal. And then plan to take the PSAT in the fall. I know that there are schools in the area that give you the option to do it. In my opinion, it's kind of a no risk option. It's good practice for future standardized tests, ACT and SAT. It's not like it's going to show up when you submit it to colleges. If you get the score that you don't want, you can maybe achieve national merit. We also do some PSAT prep. We do add-ons to packages for high scores. We're going to run a couple of classes later this summer and fall, so be on the lookout for that. But that's just a good way to kind of kick off the testing year as a junior to take that test.
Perfect. And then on the college counseling side of things, because we have a little bit more leeway on timing, again, first step, just sign up for a meeting with the college counselor. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be with me. So I would look forward to meeting all of you all and hopefully learning more about what you're excited for, but also what you're nervous about when it comes to preparing for college. As Dan said, the testing requirements are constantly changing. And being able to not only have the hands-on, one-on-one personalized support from our testing arm to make sure that you're going to knock things out of the park within your respective, range of testing that you're capable of, but also that you're working with the college counselor to understand what are the specific programs, the specific universities, and also even coming from your high school, because it can get very nuanced. What are those respective levels of testing that you want to aim for to stand out from the pack and make sure that you have a solid shot at getting admitted to a wide range of universities? That's going to be a level of support that is really helpful coming from college counseling. As we were talking about earlier with the more recent changes to the ACT, we know that even with more and more blurbs, emails, webinars being given out by our university partners, they're going to be approaching it in a wide variety of ways. So while we will keep up with them, have our ears to the ground, and also leverage a bit of inside connections that we may have with friends still in the field, we're going to be able to help you navigate any changes that have already been announced or changes that are already in the works, but have yet to been released, to the public as well. And one thing, in addition to, again, reaching out to us for test prep and myself specifically for college counseling, we would love to have you all just be in our Galin family from a communication standpoint. We are constantly being communicative, whether it's through emails, our annual newsletters that we're sending out, blog posts, both through our website and also through our LinkedIn, and similar webinars to what we're doing now. These are great opportunities to make sure that you're staying abreast of the type of resources that we have to offer, the type of updates that are coming from colleges, and we're able to kind of walk you through what this actually means or how it could affect your students' college and testing preparation. Literally anything underneath the sun, we talk about because we are all nerds of education within the Galin family. So we would love to have you all, stay in touch with us as well and just be able to take advantage of the information that we're sending out so you feel less stressed and a lot more supported. Any questions? Both you can hopefully been able to drop those throughout our question box while we've been talking, but also if anything comes to mind now, please feel free to drop those in the chat because we would love to be able to just answer anything you might be curious about, whether testing or preparing for testing in the college, admissions process. And there's a very real possibility that we may have done such a good job and shared so much information that you all are completely satiated with any information on testing and colleges and everything that we talked about today, which is also fine too. One thing I will say, in case you all maybe have questions that you want to ask offline or just things that you feel like you would like to maybe schedule a consultation with either Dan or myself, definitely reach out to info@galinet.com. Any and all questions that come through will be able to be sorted to the right person. And again, we offer so much, whether it's test prep, whether it's college counseling, individualized academic tutoring, and also executive function coaching. We pretty much can own all the different ways your student may need some extra support or some extra guidance to cross the finish line and be able to make sure that as they're preparing for the college process, they are taken care of. As they're working their way through studying or figuring out whether they want to pursue the ACT or the SAT, they're supported. And as they're making that transition, even from an executive functioning standpoint to college, that they're going to hit the ground running as a college freshman and really make sure that they have a wonderful experience at the next level. So, unless there are any questions that come through, oh, I think we do have one. Perfect. So this question is focused on for students who have already taken the ACT and have received their scores, meaning they're going to be applying for admission in fall 2026. Will science be included in the composite score? Oh, this is a good one, Dan.
Yep. The answer to that is yes. If they've already tested, then they will see that composite score. The trigger for not including the science is when students take what the enhanced ACT. So we have been counseling all of our families. So there was a weird thing that happened, not weird. It's just the way the ACT decided to do it. I thought it was kind of weird. Where they ran the enhanced ACT concurrently with the legacy ACT this past spring. So April, June, and then the July test coming up this weekend. You could take, if you took the paper pencil test, it was the legacy ACT. If you took the computer test, it was the enhanced ACT. If you've only taken the legacy ACT, their super score will be the legacy ACT super score. So the science will be, or I'm sorry, well, super score and composite score actually, it answers both questions. The science will be included in the composite score until a student takes an enhanced version of the ACT.
Nice. Then we also have two more questions.
Okay, great.
First one for college counseling, which packages include identifying colleges, with the exception of our essay focus and our application focus services that we offer, whether you're pursuing hourly or more comprehensive packages available from us, they're both going to include in identifying colleges. I will speak on behalf of hopefully all college counselors, both in high school and independent. That's one of our favorite parts of supporting students because we get to learn so much about what they love, what they're passionate about in and outside of the classroom. And it allows us to be able to help you discover the wide range of universities and colleges that are available. So that is something that if you sign up hourly or comprehensive with us, you're definitely going to get that included in your service. It's one of our favorite things to do. I kid you not. The next question I'm seeing is, can or should a senior submit an additional SAT score after applying to a school? I can follow up with this more so in the timeline, but Dan, do you want to jump in from a testing perspective?
Actually, I think why don't you handle that one on the timing side of things because every school has such different requirements and early decision and regular decision and all that kind of stuff. That's probably a better question for you, Justin.
Definitely. So I will say it is all dependent upon timing. Usually through the more earlier rounds of an admissions process, students are expected to submit their application anywhere from the earliest, at say like a University of North Carolina, for example, October 15th. More traditionally, you're gonna have to submit your application during the early round, anywhere from November 1st to November 15th. Now, putting my Northwestern hat back on, it's all about timing just because traditionally the earliest that anyone will see or start to review your application is roughly 7 to 10 calendar days after that initial deadline. So if you feel that, hey, I know I'm cutting it close to November 1st, but there's an October date and they promise I'm going to get it back in like 2 to 3 weeks, I can already let whether it's the SAT or the ACT know to just please forward that to my ED1 choice because I really need to get this score and I'm confident that it will, come through within the middle 50 I'm aiming for, right? If you feel that way, then yes, there's a possibility that it can be a marked improvement and increase your academic profile, which is a really impactful aspect of what universities and colleges review when they are making admit deny decisions for students. But again, I'm going to go back to it really just depends on your timing. As Dan said, in a perfect world, we really hope to be able to have our students finish up with their official testing by the spring of their 11th grade year. That also works out perfectly working with the college counselor because if you're done by then, that means we can really focus on getting back your final transcripts shortly after school ends, seen as a lot of students are getting their scores back now, maybe what AP scores you got in addition to your standardized testing on the ACT or SAT. And when we're starting to switch into the application focus, just knowing what your testing is when we're starting to finalize your college list allows us to make a lot of strategic and well-informed decisions on which universities you're actually going to be applying to. So again, it's a matter of testing. Everyone has a different journey. So if you have to push maybe some testing a little bit closer to your deadlines, it won't be the end of the world, but it might make things a little bit hectic. So I'll say follow Dan's guidance and judgment. Try to wrap things up, by the end of your 11th grade year. It'll make everybody's lives a little bit less stressful.
Yeah. And I will say there, with the SAT adding the September date this year, before any of these deadlines, there's August, there's early September, there's early October on the SAT side. On the ACT side, there's a September ACT. October gets a little close. It's October 18th this year. But those are usually all early. This is actually, I think, answering the next question, which is how late is too late for the class of 2026 to take ACT, SAT? You're usually safe by the October ACT unless there's a really early deadline, or sorry, October ACT, unless there's a really early deadline. There are then no early November, early December SATs and a December ACT, but that's really cutting it close for a lot of places, from what I understand.
Yeah. And Dan, this next one might be great for you as well, because
Yep, I got it. Is the enhanced ACT the only option available this fall? If so, is it digital or on paper? Um, Yes, with one exception, which I'll explain in a minute. Everything after this weekend is shifting to the enhanced ACT, and it is digital or paper. We are very strongly recommending the paper pencil version because when the SAT switched over to digital, there's just glitches that happen, and we that are less likely in a paper pencil situation than on a computer. I should also mention, if you are signing up for an official test, we usually tell students sign up for a test early. There's no penalty for not showing up. It's better to have it, kind of what Justin was saying, it's better to have it and not need it. We are recommending that everybody sign up for paper pencil with science, no writing. With science, as I already mentioned, because we think colleges are still going to care about it. No writing because no colleges care about the writing section anymore. Students do need to take it in school in the spring, but that's just because it's the state standardized writing test for juniors. So, um, yes, for almost everybody, enhanced ACT is the only option available this fall. The exception that I mentioned, one thing that the ACT in its timeline, that's also a little bit confusing is they are not switching over their school day testing to the enhanced ACT until the spring. So all the national dates this fall will be enhanced. If a school is giving the test in school, which there's at least one in the area here, Edgewood, but there might be others that give it in October, that will still be the legacy version of the ACT. So if you have a student that attends a school that's giving the tests, there's a window, a lot of schools do it in October, before 2026. The test that they will take in school will be the old version, the legacy version of the ACT. And that can also be on paper, pencil, or computer, depending on the school. There's one more question in the Q&A, Justin. I think we probably both can answer this one.
I can
Yeah, you
go
want
ahead.
first?
Yeah, I can jump in. So this question is also towards if a student's ACT is slightly outside and very slightly, like 1 point below the 25% range for the school they're interested in, should they still submit? I say that comes with a lot of nuance. And I say nuance just because usually it's a little bit better to go by the middle 50 percentile as opposed to the lower 25 percentile when you're looking at a university's either ACT or SAT middle 50% or just their quartiles. The reason why I say that, and this is particularly for any universities that have scholarship athletes, what we see in the game of admissions is a lot of times the lower scores are the outliers. And while your student can certainly be an outlier and be within 1 point of that 25 percentile or 25% quartile, it's always not guaranteed, and you'd rather have a little bit more, as you say, confidence head into the application process by being right there in that middle 50 than hoping that you're going to be pulled as one of the outliers. I mentioned for universities with athletics because a fair amount of those are coming from scholarship athletes, which, if they are at least D1 from an ACT standpoint, if I'm remembering correctly, scholarship athletes only have to hit that 17 ACT exception to be able to be available and qualified for scholarships at the D1 level. And that definitely skews the numbers, quite a bit. So while it's not going to be an impossibility because the admissions process is equal parts science and a bit of art, because don't forget, it's real life humans, just like I was on the other side of that screen, doing their best to make sure that they're admitting a wonderfully diverse and also deserving class of incoming students. You want to put yourself in the best probabilities when you're thinking about the type of testing that you're aiming for, and also when you're thinking of how competitive a university might be from a testing standpoint, even if you're within like 1 point of that lowest 25%. And that's what I'll say from more of an admissions and a college preparation standpoint. Dan, did you want to jump in as well?
I think the only thing to add to that, which is to, it's going to depend on whether the school is test optional or not. This is becoming less and less of a question as more schools shift away from test optional. It's sort of I always kind of describe it geographically. It kind of started in the Southeast with schools requiring tests, and then it moved to the coast with the Ivies and Stanfords of the world, and it's making its way into the Big Ten. Ohio State earlier this spring went back to requiring test scores. So it's also going to depend on the school's test optional policy. And some of the, and Justin can, I'm sure, speak to this even more than I can, but what I've heard in things that I've read and attended in conferences and things is they're starting to use words, college admissions offices are starting to use words like recommended and encouraged and those always sort of like lots of nuance there, but they definitely signal to you which way they're leaning on tests. So
Definitely. I completely agree. When you do hear recommended, encouraged, or even some of these optional essays on the application, better safe than sorry. You do want to kind of abide by what the universities are gently hinting as, we'll say. Thanks. These are great questions. Anyone else still curious? We do have some time before we wrap up. So if anyone has any other questions that they're really biting at the bit to be able to ask, please go right ahead. Well, I think I might say it seems that you've done a good job of answering all of your questions. I hope everyone learned a lot tonight. Hopefully everyone's stress level is lower than it was before you attended this webinar. And I will say as well on behalf of Galin, we hope to hear from you all, whether it's from a testing standpoint, whether from a college admissions and preparation standpoint, possibly both, because again, both of our arms are an amazing 1-2 punch and work really well together. But we would love to be there to support you all in this journey, bring the stress level down, and just help your students cross the finish line in a way that feels authentic and more happy than not for them. So, knowing that it's getting late, we will wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for being able to hop on tonight. Again, if you have any questions or want to reach out for any information on how to get started with us, info@galined.com. And I will say, keep an eye out for our next webinars. I will say they're always interesting. We're nerds again, so we think this is always going to be interesting. But usually, even for folks and families preparing for college, it's a pretty fun ride when you hop online with us. But we appreciate you stopping in tonight and hope everyone has a great rest of their evening and a rest of the week.
thank
Take
you
care.
all. It's great to talk to you.